All right, welcome back. So in this video, we're now going to talk about what I call the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And this has to do with basically the connection between the Holy Spirit and your subconscious in prayer. And as you can see, there's really not too much to talk about. I don't have a huge amount of experience with subconscious energy sort of functioning through this condition, which I'll talk about. But this is something I believe happens, and I have had some experience with it. So I wanted to talk about it. So just to go over this first point, it says the Holy Spirit can influence your subconscious in a way that causes a special kind of charge to occur. So this basically the Holy Spirit has the ability to, exactly what it says, has the ability to affect your subconscious mind. So not only does it have the ability to plant suggestions here and there, I believe it can also impact it in a way where it's like it charges in a particular, either, I don't know if the Holy Spirit does all the charging for you, or if it influences your subconscious so that you have an easier time charging in this direction or that direction. So it's tough to say, but ultimately what it still boils down to is you can perform almost a new kind of very special kind of charge through the effect of the Holy Spirit. You could say more like a spiritual charge, right? Which is not the same as charging spiritual energy. This would be like more of a spiritual charge, or a holy charge, which comes from the Holy Spirit. And so that's really what I believe is meant by what's called the gifts of the Holy Spirit, right? And this is something talked about in Christianity, if you're not familiar with that. If you are, you've been to church, you've probably heard this many times. I do believe this is talked about to some degree in the Bible, but I don't remember. I have to read more of the Bible to get up to that point. But yeah, so the Holy Spirit has the ability to influence your subconscious and help you charge for certain functions. And what it ultimately comes down to, in terms of how it helps you to charge and what abilities it helps to give you, is through your prayer, right? At least I believe. Some of it can be through just your purpose in life, right? Which we talk a little more about that in chapter 10. But in other ways, it can be based on what you're praying for. So there have been times in my life, right? I'll probably say 2-ish times that I can remember where I would have these like irrational thoughts in my mind, and I prayed for it and asked God for help with it. And then I would just feel like, it's a little hard to describe it. It's like almost like a patch on my subconscious mind, right? Where normally it's very volatile in this direction of this thing that I'm thinking about that's causing me anxiety. And then it would just like it wouldn't stop altogether, but its volatility would just drop like that. And I would know that it happened without me going through the work, because I know how to reduce volatility. We talked about that in book 1, right? Just take your mind off something and then it enters a passive state and it loses energy. We're focused on it and go through the grievance effect. We talked about that in chapter 14, where it builds a whole bunch of negative memory. I know exactly how it works, right? But this time it happened without me doing any of that. And it happened very quickly, like instantaneously, right? And so I was like, I know how subconscious energy works. It's basically not supposed to do that. It never does that. But it happened right after my prayer, right? So it happened from praying. And I believe that's an example of the influence of the Holy Spirit. So it can do things like that in terms of taking away certain fears. I don't know that it can take them all away. I have heard people say that it can take away fears or addictions and things like that. Some people have said, I'm trying to remember the guy's name. I have to look it up. But he was saying how he actually had an NDE experience. He saw Jesus, and he said that he had an addiction, either an addiction or something that he was constantly giving into from temptation, and it just completely went away, right? But other times, for other people, it doesn't really happen like that. They still have to go through the work. So I guess it depends on the person. But the Holy Spirit can ultimately reduce your fear or your addiction or some negative thoughts that are coming to your mind or negative desires. It can like temper them, right? But you still have to go through the work in those cases of really overcoming it. But it will help you, right? So that's one example of how the Holy Spirit can help you. Another way, and this really has to do with the gifts of the Holy, well, that's still a gift of the Holy Spirit, but the other gifts of the Holy Spirit, I believe, are related to your purpose in life. So you can have gifts related to prophecy, right? So some people online are able to do that. They can they get various sort of visions from God about the future and things like that. I think Troy Black is one of them. We'll talk more about dreams like in chapter 10, so that it would make more sense on how that works. Other people I've seen people online who seem to have the ability to heal others. So that was something I've seen from other NDEs. Usually it's after NDE experience, they come back and they have the ability to heal. I believe that gives another gift of the Holy Spirit. You can have the gift of understanding. So honestly, I feel like I have that, right? I feel like that actually happened to me when I was downloading information. I felt like I was being downloaded information after I prayed to God for information about the spirit realm, right? I just wanted to know how it works. I've always had that desire in me. And I prayed to him that day, and I made a sincere prayer, right? Fully honest, fully sincere, trusting in God. So the things we talked about. And the next day, I felt like I was just being downloaded with information. And I feel like I've always had that to some degree, and I've been sort of leaning into that gift for years. So I think that's one of my gifts. And ultimately, I feel like that still comes from certain inspirations and ideas come from the Holy Spirit, right? You can also have the gift of, I've never done this, but some people have the gift of deliverance. We'll talk a little more about that in the next chapter. I forgot. There's actually a name I wanted to come up with, but I forgot his name. I forgot to look it up before I made this video. Let me see. All right, so I had to take a moment to look that up. But yeah, so his name is Dan Rehill, if I'm saying it right. So he's a guy who I think has this gift from the Holy Spirit to deliver people. Basically to, when I say deliver people, I mean perform like an exorcism of negative entities, which we haven't talked about them. We'll talk about them more in the next chapter. But he has the ability to sort of exorcise demons from people, right? Now, the way he does it, as far as I know, I could be wrong because I haven't done a huge amount of research on him, but the way that he does it is kind of more in line with the way I would expect it to work. Some people, right, some pastors, they will have people come up on stage in front of hundreds, if not thousands of people, and they perform deliverances or exorcisms, and they're like, step right up, right? So get your exorcism here, right? And it's like, that is not generally, in my experience, how God moves, right? And when you see these guys doing these things, it looks very fake and very rehearsed and, not good. The way he does it looks like the real way. It's usually behind closed doors. Not a lot of people are around, right? Because one thing I can tell you about the spirit realm, this is my understanding, I could be wrong. In the spirit realm, they very much look kind of, I don't want to word it. They kind of look down, I don't know if that's the right word, but they very much look down on the idea of using supernatural abilities or supernaturalism to help others to know God, right? That's completely against kind of the whole purpose of what we're doing here, right? Which is why I don't really believe in doing that stuff. And we'll talk more about it later. I'm pretty sure I know how to do that, or I could do it in a way that could be demonstrated to other people. But no, if God and angels were willing to use supernaturalism to help others to believe in him, then they would be doing it all the time, right? If God and angels wanted to use supernaturalism to help people to sort of know God and come to him, then they would do it all the time, right? That isn't really what they're looking for. There are, of course, exceptions to that, right? But generally, they really want people to come to God and do the right thing because they feel it in their heart and they have a desire for God's goodness, right? So we've been talking about that, right? They don't really want you to do a supernatural act and the person says, oh, the supernatural is real. Let me search for God. No, right? That's the wrong motivation. And so exorcism, right, which sometimes can demonstrate supernatural phenomena, even looking at it from the outside, my understanding is that it wouldn't really be the case that God would want these things performed in front of a crowd and everybody, looking and come right up. No, right? That's, you know what I mean? So he's one of the few, I don't know what his title, excuse me, I don't know his title, but he's one of the, I'll just call him a priest, right? So he's one of the few priests who I actually believe has that ability to exorcise demons, and there are other ones, right? I've never done that, so I've never done that for another person. I've definitely had demonic experiences, but I don't think I've ever been possessed. We'll talk more about that in the next chapter. But yeah, that is another power that I believe you get from the Holy Spirit. So the Holy Spirit can influence you in all kinds of ways. It can give you gifts, right? Those gifts will generally be to help you fulfill whatever purpose you have. It can give you intelligence, right? If your purpose is to engage in some type of intelligence or use your intelligence to create some difference in the world, right? So it can give you all kinds of gifts, and it can do other things with your subconscious just to kind of help you day to day. It gives almost like a structure to your subconscious that helps you to behave like Jesus. So it does all types of wonderful things. But ultimately, that relates to the gifts of the Holy Spirit. So if you want help from the Holy Spirit to sort of unlock some gift, or usually you know what your gifts are by a certain age. But if you want help from the Holy Spirit to help your subconscious charge in a specific way, then you just pray. You pray to God, right, that you would like to have this type of ability or help to hone this type of ability. Now, another important thing I should mention is always in God's judgment, of course, right? There are some prayers you may have that God may say no to, right? That's just the way it is. And some of them He may say yes. What He says no to will generally be if it's sinful, right? But two, if it's against your purpose, if it's not in line with what you're supposed to do. And we'll talk a little more about purpose later because there's different levels to purpose, but in chapter 10. But yeah, if it's not aligned with your purpose, or if it takes you away from your purpose, or if it's sinful, then no, right? But outside of that, He usually, as far as I know, it pretty much approves it every single time. So you have to ask Him. But I imagine, because I haven't really done that much, so I imagine if you pray to God and He approves it, you would still have to hone in your gift, right? So you still have to charge your subconscious regularly to use that ability, but the Holy Spirit would help you. Right, so yeah, that's pretty much it for the video. I just wanted to go over this topic. In the next video, I think we'll talk about staying in alignment with your prayer, which is pretty consistent with what we're going to talk about in chapter 10. Stuff I learned in chapter 10 came after I already wrote it, so we'll just talk about it now. But then we kind of go over the idea again in chapter 10 in a more full form. But yeah, that's it for now, though. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.